Welcome everybody, and it's great to be here at Motorsport Live. It's the first time I've presented at this particular event, first time I've presented in this kind of forum as well, so all new to me. Anyway, welcome. You join us at a really exciting time. Obviously we are currently down in the desert at the moment, but what I want to do is give you a bit of context around the project itself to start off with, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing down in the desert. So just to start off with, here's a video that gives you a flavour of where we're at. So there's just a little flavour of that transition between the old Bloodhound SSC and Bloodhound LSR. But let's go back in history a little bit, just to give a bit of context about land speed record. These three cars that you got up here all broke the land speed record. The one on the far left-hand side got up to the staggering speed of 39 miles per hour, 300 miles an hour, 39 miles per hour. Slightly slower than the bicycle speed record at the time. They modified that car to the one in the middle, got up to about 60 miles an hour. Interesting thing about all three of these cars is they're all electric, so way ahead of their time in terms of knowing where we were going in the future. So that's where it all started, back in the turn of the century. Let's jump forward a little bit. This car here, this is John Cobb in the Railton Mobile Special. The reason why this car has particular significance is because Richard Noble, my old boss, Mr. Land Speed Record of our time, went to see John Cobb when he was 5 years old, and he decided that that's when he wanted to break the land speed record. So he said, right, that's my aim, to become the John Cobb of the future. And so it was John Cobb's fault that Richard got into land speed record. Richard developed three cars, Thrust 1, which you can see on the left there, Thrust 2 and Thrust SSC, as well as Bloodhound itself. Thrust 1, not the world's most successful car, got a jet engine, strapped it to a chassis that he bought from GKN, a company he used to work for. Started to get up to some reasonable speeds, then managed to turn the car over. Didn't hurt himself, did damage the jet engine, put it on a low loader, took it to a scrap yard, got 40 quid for it, went down the pub, had a stiff drink, decided he needed some engineers to help him, and then developed Thrust 2. Obviously much more successful. Thrust 2, 633 miles an hour, broke the land speed record, did some CFD, some computational fluid dynamics on the car well after he'd done the runs, and found out that he was within 7 miles an hour of takeoff. Had he known that at the time, would he have kept his foot quite as firmly planted to the floor? Possibly not, but he didn't, and he did, and so therefore captured the land speed record. You'll notice that it's a two-seat car, Thrust SSC. Used to take potential sponsors and people out for little joyrides, just to sort of give them a feel about what it might feel like, loosen up their check hand when it was coming to doing that sponsorship bit, until he had an excursion onto the inner field one day, and then the insurance company, not the guys that were here just now, but insurance company said, that's it, you can't take anybody else out in the car. So therefore, to balance the whole car up, they used to put a sack of potatoes in the passenger seat, so he also holds the land speed record for a sack of potatoes as well. Not wishing to stand still, Richard is never a person to stand still, even now. He decided he wanted to go faster. 633 wasn't enough, so where'd you go next? Well, obviously, the next logical step was to break the sound barrier. And so he started to look at a car that could do that, and they started to design Thrust SSC. Ron Ayres got on board, which was fantastic, aerodynamicist, and more of him later. Andy Green became the driver. They had an advert in the newspaper, driver required land speed record. Andy answered it along with lots of other nutters. Andy actually got the job. The reason Andy got the job at the end of the day came down to two people, was because Andy wasn't married and didn't have children, okay? Because obviously land speed record driving can be dangerous. I think there's a disclaimer on all motorsport. Motorsport is dangerous, okay? So Andy breaks the land speed record. The picture you've got on the left-hand side was taken from a microlight, and Thrust SSC has just broken through the sound barrier. That shockwave has permeated the desert, lifted the dust off the desert. The sun, which was very low in the sky, is shining through that dust, and that's why you can see the shockwave superbly across the front of the car. Because Bloodhound is going to be going significantly faster, that shockwave will wrap itself round the car more, and we should get much more of a conical shape. The microlight pilot had forgotten the fact that shockwaves go out and also up, so about a second and a half after this photograph was taken, the shockwave hit him, turned him upside down, but he was quite good, microlight pilot, managed to save himself, and that's why we've got this photograph. So what about Bloodhound itself? Well, here's a few key stats. When she's got the rocket on board and fully fueled, she'll weigh 8 tons. At the moment, we're down in the desert, we're doing high-speed testing, we're looking to get up to 500 miles an hour, and we'll cover that measured mile in 7.2 seconds. That's 2.25 football pitches at 500 miles an hour in 1 second. We burn 1.5 tons of fuel in 55 seconds when we're going flat out, and we're 13.5 meters long and about 3.5 meters high. I'll tell you a bit more about the inside of the car later on, but those are the key stats. So the project started back in 2008. I was one of the original team members back then who started with the project, and Bloodhound SSC carried on until 2018. Okay, the highlight of that particular phase of the project was taking the car down to Newquay, travelling at 200 miles an hour on the airfield down there. Andy Green having a bit of a scare when he had to realise that you had to heat up carbon brakes before they actually became effective. And there's a fantastic video of him putting his foot on the brake, not stopping, not slowing down, and his little eyes go pop like this, and he takes his foot off, puts his foot back down again, gets some heat into the brakes, slows down before he gets into the runway. But a bit of a moment for him there, bit of a learning curve, I feel it was. So, 2018, the project ran into serious financial difficulties. It had done so throughout the lifetime of the project. It was always a hand-to-mouth existence, getting the money in for the project. But we came to the end of the road, no money was forthcoming, so the project went into administration. But before we talk about that, let's just have a look at what 200 miles an hour looks like.
Wind 2 o'clock, 5 knots.
So the car weighed about 5 tons on that day. Started off at 0, wasn't a rolling start. Got up to 200 miles an hour in about 8 seconds. Andy had his foot on the floor for about 3.5 seconds on full reheat. Had to take his foot off at just the right point to make sure he could slow down, get those carbon brakes working, to make sure he had stopping distance in order to turn the car around. We came round for a double run. We presented to about 8,000 people over 3 days, came down to see the car. Fantastic event. We thought that was going to be the thing that would kick off the next phase, get the next lot of funding in. It wasn't, and so went into administration, and then was bought 2 days before the man came along with the angle grinder to cut her up by Ian Warhurst. So Ian got a text from his son. Son's about 17, 18, saw that Andy Green had posted the fact the car was for sale. Said, come on, Dad, you just sold your company, you got a bit of cash, why don't you go and buy it? So his dad went to have a look at it, went down on the Wednesday, was due to go and celebrate his retirement on the Saturday, go away with his wife for a nice quiet weekend together, left seeing the man in the car park, bought it on the Thursday, went on holiday on the Friday, and then spent the entire weekend being interviewed by the press, who were saying, you know, all this sort of stuff, while his wife sort of went on holiday all by herself. So, a great start to their retirement, but fantastic for the project. Got totally rebranded, lost the blue and orange, we're now red and white, and Ian then had to decide, well, do I hand the project back to Richard, do I give it to a museum, or do I decide to run it? So they did some sums, decided yes, that's what they were going to do, they were going to run the car this year. Okay, so this is back in March of this year, and what they've done since then is worked really, really hard to get the car ready, to take it down to South Africa, and that's the process that started. So, that's where the team is now. They're down on the desert. So 25 of them flew down there about 3 weeks ago with the car itself. So we're down at the Hack Scheme Pan. So when you're driving a land speed record car and you want to go 1,000 miles an hour, which is the design speed of the car, what you have to do is find a very long, very flat space, okay? So, Andy spoke to Swansea University, who said, right, we'll use Google Earth and NASA data, we'll find all the places that are 12 miles long, 3 miles wide-ish, okay, that are as flat as possible, came up with a list of about 20, discounted the ones that are too high, because the air's too thin, too low, the air's too thick, politically you didn't want to go to, just in case you got arrested, the ones that you couldn't get to geographically, and then you come down to a list of about 7. And then what you do is you get married, which is what Andy Green did, and then took his prospective wife on honeymoon to all these deserts. So went to 7 deserts around the world. She's fantastic, thought that was great. Strange kind of woman, but there you go. And they're lighted on the Vanook Pan, which is about 30 miles south of the Hack Scheme Pan. Vanook Pan had a bit of history to it. Campbell had run on it, had tried to break the land speed record, hadn't managed to achieve that, so we thought we'll go there, a bit of heritage. Then the Northern Cape government said, but hang on, the Hack Scheme Pan it's bigger desert, it's wider, it's better for you. We said, yeah, we discounted that one because it's covered with stones and it's got a causeway across it. Said, not a problem, what we'll do is we'll pick up 16,000 tons of stones from 24 million square meters and we'll take out the causeway. And that's exactly what they did. So 315 people for the last 3.5 years have been picking up every single stone from 24 million square meters, putting it in a wheelbarrow, carrying it to the edge of the desert and making piles. So there are piles of stones all the way down the side of the desert, but we have the best racetrack for land speed record that's ever been prepared. The guys are down there at the moment. It's just an awesome space. When I went down there about 3 years ago, it kind of opens itself up to you, and you just can't imagine how big it is when you actually get down there. So, we've got the racetrack, fantastic. We then need some wheels to go on there. Okay, so the wheels. At the original design speed of the car, they rotate at 10,200 RPM, and they generate 50,000 G at the rims, okay? So you need something that's going to contain that hoop stress. So we went for a titanium cup-shaped wheel, because we needed to house the brake pack in there. Unfortunately, when we did simulations, we ran it up to speed, that was starting to open out. So what we then decided, redesigned it, went for a symmetrical wheel, and went for aluminium, a very high grade of aluminium, and then we needed to design the profile for it. So you'll see on the screen there are 2 different profiles. One slightly more sort of pointed, slightly more guillotine shaped, and that's the one we've gone for. This is where we were doing some testing down in the desert. What we did was we loaded up a Bowser with enough weight to simulate the car, drove around the desert, see how the wheels behave. The wheel on the left gives us a bit of lateral grip, so it doesn't allow the car to just slide around the desert, but it will allow the car to slide should she get a bit of a sideways on, which obviously we don't want. So that's the one we've gone for. Castle Precision Engineering have produced those wheels for us. We've estimated the value of each of those wheels at about £200,000, and we have a set of 12. So we have 12 wheels made already. So how do you make the car go that fast? Well, you've got to make it as slippery as possible. So the car is about 1 metre wide at the front and about 2.5 metres wide at the back where the rear wheels are. And we use computational fluid dynamics to actually design the shape of the car. Okay, that's where you put the car shape into a supercomputer, you create a world around the car and you calculate what's going to happen to every single molecule of air inside that world, and you come up with pretty patterns like this which tell you what's going to happen to the car when it's going at different speeds. Part of the high-speed testing that we're doing in South Africa is to check that data against actual data. So there are about 175 pressure sensors across the entire car which will validate that data. Now, in the days of thrust SSC, computational fluid dynamics was in its infancy, so they weren't quite confident in it. So what they thought was, what they would do is get an actual model of the car, and rather than pushing air over it, they'd push it through the air. And this is what they did.
One puffer only function, wait.
I like to show it twice, just in case you didn't get it the first time. That is 0 to 815 miles an hour in 0.8 of a second. Okay? So what they did was they strapped 8 strafing rockets to the back side of the model of the car. They built a track in the middle of the actual 2 tracks that it runs down to simulate the ground. And they gradually moved that closer and closer to the underside of the car. And then they took the data from pressure sensors underneath the model, high-speed photography, and the data they got from that correlated with the data that they got from the model within 5%. So the CFD and the model it said, yep, you're okay, that car is good to be made. And so that's what they did. They went ahead and made the car and built the car to that model. A couple of takeaways from that. The first is, next year, when Andy's doing 800 miles an hour, that's how fast he will be traveling. Okay? It's the only thing I know that gives you any kind of comprehension as to how fast Andy will be traveling. Okay? Second thing is, they let it off very early one morning, got a seagull, took the seagull with it. They now hold the low airspeed record for a seagull as well. If I'm doing this in front of children, the seagull was only slightly stunned, by the way. Okay? But it's just an amazing piece of footage, really, that tells you exactly how fast he's going to be going. So how do you get something that weighs 8 tons to go from 0 to 800 or 1,000 miles an hour in 55 seconds? Well, what you do is you go to the MOD and you say, Mr. MOD, can we borrow 3 of your most advanced jet engines? And surprisingly, the MOD laugh slightly, chuckle a little bit, and go, no. And then they have a bit of a longer think about it, and they say, we need more engineers. We need more engineers in the MOD, we need more engineers in industry, we need more engineers in motorsport. So if you bolt an education program on the side of your project, what we will do is we'll get you your engines. So Lord Drayson quickly shook hands with Richard Noble on that. So if you go to Duxford Air Museum and you look at the back of their Eurofighter, you'll see there's 2 big holes, and that's because we've got their engines. We've also got another engine, so we have 3 EJ200s. We're the only organisation outside of various air forces that has access to these engines. We have access to the full schematics of the engine. We have support from Rolls-Royce and also from the MOD in terms of running them. And that is what we are running on down at the Haxkeen Pan at this moment in time. But that only gets you up to maybe 600, 650. So you also need a rocket.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Perfect.
That's as excited as rocket engineers get, by the way. Oh, well done, yes. We've just fired a really, really powerful rocket. So that rocket is a hybrid rocket. There are 3 types of rocket in the world: solid fuel, liquid fuel, and hybrids. Okay, solid fuel, Guy Fawkes Knight, light blue touch paper, retire to a suitable distance, off it goes. Not very keen on those types of rocket because there's only 2 ways of putting it out. One is a bucket of water and the other is an explosive charge, neither of which are attractive to Andy. Second type of rocket, dual liquid fuel, okay, Apollo's rockets, 2 liquids in the top, mix them together, big flame out the bottom. Great for vertical rockets, not so good for horizontal because they don't tend to mix so well, okay? So the type we're using is a hybrid, which is a liquid oxidizer and a solid fuel. The liquid oxidizer is HTP, H2O2, okay? And the solid fuel is HTPB, which is hydroxyl terminated polybutadiene. Did you get that down? Hydroxyl terminated polybutadiene, okay? Or rubber, okay? Which is much shorter and easier for you to write down. Okay, so rubber, anything of high calorific value you can use in a rocket, okay? So cardboard soaked in kerosene, doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's going to burn, you can use it as a solid fuel. The oxidizer is the important thing. So when we go for the land speed record, we are just going to be using the decomposing HTP part of that rocket. So we're not using it on full hybrid, we're just going to use it as the liquid oxidizer. So basically, we're going to be a steam-powered car. Now, there is a record for the steam-powered car, which sits at about 350 miles an hour. So there is talk of us just actually trying to take that record just using the hybrid rocket. We might need a bit of a push start to get things going, but we can just eject steam out the back of the car. So from a green point of view, we just produce water and oxygen with the rocket, okay? So, this is the new building. Oh, by the way, forgot to say, the total power output of the car, because I know people like these types of statistics, is 133,000 horsepower equivalent, okay? So that's the total power output. So Ian buys the project, decides he's going to run the car, reforms the team that built the car in the first place, who all come back. We move to a new building just up the road from Bristol, so we're at SGS, Berkeley, where the power station is, and we rebrand the car and then start preparing the car to bring the car down to the desert. This is the vehicle package, run through very quickly. The nose cone of the car, the very tip of the car is printed titanium. It's a technology demonstrator. We could have made it out of carbon fiber, but it is quite good because lots of people, when they're walking around the car, tend to kick the nose of it, and so it's very strong and robust. As you come back, you've got all the electronics just behind the tip of the car. Then you see that tank just in front of the wheels. Okay, you've got accumulators in there. You've got those wheels which rotate, as I said, at 10,200 RPM. Then you've got Andy Green. Okay, there is some ballistic protection either side of Andy Green, because if one of the wheels lets go, what he doesn't want is high-speed bits of aluminium heading towards his head. So what we've done is we've got these panels which are about yay thick, and we've shot a piece of aluminium at them at the equivalent of a cricket ball traveling at 2,000 miles an hour, and it stopped that. And just for good measure, we fired a 9mm round straight at it. It also shot that. So should somebody want to take a pot shot at Andy, he's covered, so that's fine. Then just behind Andy's head is a tank, you can see that, which is behind a bulkhead. And that split line is where the car goes from carbon fiber at the front to titanium and aluminium at the back, okay? That tank contains 1,000 litres of HTP. HTP is used by terrorists to blow things up because a litre of HTP has the equivalent explosive force of 1 stick of dynamite. So he's got 1,000 sticks of dynamite sat just behind his head, but it's okay, because if it does go bang, he's not going to know anything about it. Okay, then behind there you've got the V8 Jag engine. We need a V8 Jag engine there with 550 brake horsepower that we are using as a fuel pump to pump the fuel into the rocket. Okay, so we've got a 550 brake horsepower pump, fuel pump. The tube at the bottom is for where the rocket goes. Jet engine at the top, air intake for the jet engine, and the big tail fin at the top to make sure she's pointing in the right direction. Okay? As I say, the back end of the car is aerospace, the front end of the car is motorsport. And the AP guys, who are around here somewhere, so they're going to come and listen to my presentation. It's their brake set that's going to be sitting on the front of the car. So there are several of my sponsors who are in this hall today, people that have supported the project. At the height of the project, there were 300 product and financial sponsors supporting the project, which is a fantastic testimony to them. So, great, go down the desert, go really fast, great the land speed record. What's the point? Well, for me, as an ex-teacher, ex-engineer, the education side of the project is the point. Over the lifetime of the project, we have presented to over 2 million school children, doing workshops, introducing them to STEM subjects, getting them involved with engineering, trying to get more girls into engineering. If I told you that in half of all the state schools in the UK, there isn't one single girl doing a physics A-level. That's half of our schools, state schools in the UK. That is something that we need to change, because we are just wasting a whole load of talent. Okay, but we're doing our bit. We've got the education outreach program. I was part of that in the early stages of the project. I'm supporting them again, trying to get some more sponsorship for them to make sure they can continue with that. My favorite one is the little balloon cars here down in the bottom right-hand corner. I've helped make about 5,000 of these, made by small children. Okay, they can't blow up balloons. What they do is they cover it in spit. They then hand it to you and say, can you blow it up? I've swallowed more child's spit than I care to remember. My immune system is fantastic. But yes, so top left-hand corner, there was a bunch of school kids who make rocket cars. Their first record they set was 83 miles an hour. That record now stands at 533 miles an hour for a rocket-powered model car. So we're in a race with a bunch of school children, and at the moment, as I speak today, they are still beating us, but that may change by the end of the week. Okay, high-speed testing. Why do it? What are we testing, and what next? So, we've deployed down to the desert. 25 of the team are down there as we speak. Okay, they've taken the car down there. We've set up at the Hack Scheme Pan. We're living in Malopo Lodge, which is just down the road, about 45 minutes down the road. It's the closest sort of habitable place that people can stay at. You drive up to the Pan. There's nobody there. There's nothing there. You're right up by the border. It's an ideal location to do this. A bit dusty, a bit hot. It's about 34 down there at the moment. But what we need to do is we need to prove all the systems on the car. And we also need to prove to the world that we can do this. Because we've been saying we're going to be doing it for 10 years, and lots of people have come up to me over those 10 years going, you're never going to do it, are you? I said, it's hard, it's really difficult, it costs a lot of money, people aren't willing to spend that money, but we've got there. And so that's what they're doing down there, proving to the world that we can do it, doing those tests. So there's 2 runs that have been done today. The first of those runs was a 450 mile an hour run with single parachute being deployed. The second run is a 500 mile an hour run with 2 parachutes deployed. Okay? What they tried to do is each day is do at least 2 runs of the car. And I had a tweet from the team, a WhatsApp message, probably about half an hour ago, that they've managed to get 461 miles an hour and deployed that parachute, and everything was absolutely tickety-boo. So testing is going really, really well. They'll probably be down there for another 3 weeks. I sincerely hope so, because I fly out there tomorrow. And if they finish before I get there, I'm going to be mightily disappointed after 10 years, I can tell you. So it's going to be great to get down there and see it all in action. But we should have a little video of what it's like. No video? He told me there was a video. He put it on. No? Very disappointing. Okay. Sorry about that. There was going to be a video showing Andy Green doing his funky thing. So I don't know if the guys, you haven't got it there, definitely? No? Okay. So, there was going to be, I'll describe what was in the video. So there was Andy in the cockpit, sitting there, strapped in. He's got a very long collar on the car. The FIA said to us that the collar we'd got in the car, which only came to here, wasn't long enough because they had a crash the previous week where a man had crashed at about 300 miles an hour. And when you crash at 300 miles an hour, your neck stretches quite a long way, as does your harness. And he'd gone forward, he's come back, but his neck had gone underneath, and it snapped his neck, so they said they had to have a longer collar, so we had to design and build a longer collar. The cockpit is quite confined. I've sat in it, and my elbows, I'm the same height and age as Andy, by the way, so if I do manage to get down there, maybe he might give me a drive, I don't know. But he's got a steering wheel in front of him. The steering wheel is made from printed titanium by Renishaw. Costs £30,000 to print that steering wheel. Okay, and he's got various buttons on there which pop parachutes, do various things. And he's got a very small screen in front of him. The screen is an inch thick acrylic, stretched acrylic, but because of the angle it's at, it's like looking through 2 inches worth of actual screen. And then what he's doing is just looking at that line driving down the desert. And the video that I was going to show you was him doing about 400 miles an hour. And, actually seeing him manage to achieve those kinds of speeds is really great. One of the things we're also testing for down there is crosswind tolerance. And what they found out was the car can't really stand anything more than about 20 miles an hour, because at one point he goes into a little shake and the car actually deviates, and you see him having to correct at that point. So that's kind of the end of the presentation bit from me. So thank you very much for listening. But I'm very happy if anybody has got any questions that they would like to ask at this particular point. This is normally where everybody stays really quiet until somebody asks the first question. So you, sir, because you're taking notes, I can move with this, can't I? Would you like to ask a question? It's your 5 minutes of fame. Go for it.
I was just going to ask about the when Ian came in to take it over. How bad were things, and how did he?
So throughout the lifetime of the project, there have been 3 occasions when the team hadn't been paid for 6 months. Okay, so I think I'd borrowed money off my sister and my recently found girlfriend to make sure things kept together. But by the time Ian stepped in, there was literally nothing left in the pot, and there were no prospects. So Richard had to take the decision whether he put it into administration or not. So yes, so things were pretty dire by then. If you could imagine that the team were probably going to be staring at another 6 months of no pay. So he had to make that decision at that particular point, whether they folded the project or carried on or not. So yeah, so pretty desperate. Anybody else? Yes.
At your current rate of progress, when
Hi.
do you expect to hit the 1,000 miles per hour?
Okay, so the project's got 3 phases to it. High-speed testing. So our stated aim for this visit to the desert is 500 miles an hour. If all the figures come out correct, and we've predicted correctly how the car is going to perform, and the empirical evidence comes back and says, yes, you're on target, we will push on and potentially go 600 miles an hour while we're down there. Okay? We then come back. We then need to find another big sponsor, which is part of the reason why I do these things, to drive up more support. Big sponsor, probably 18 months' time. By the time we've developed and integrated the rocket into the car, we'll go for the land speed record. Okay, so that's going to be 800 miles an hour. And then you have to make that decision. So you've done 800 miles an hour, you've got the land speed record. Do you then spend another potential £10 million to go 200 miles an hour faster? Now, if somebody wants to take that on, the car's there, the design's there, the rocket's there, the engineering's all done. So if you've got a spare £10 million in cash, you can go 1,000 miles an hour. My guess would be that might be where the project finishes, but if there is still appetite, then somebody may take it further. So about 18 months for land speed record, and then we'll see after that. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Came and saw one of your presentations about 5 or 6 years ago, and the progress is remarkable from then. You were talking at that stage about staged braking for the vehicle because of G-forces,
Yeah.
carbon brakes only being effective to a certain point. Can you just remind us of how that works?
Yeah, so obviously going fast is one thing. Slowing down is Andy's top priority. He's quite keen on that a little bit. So in order to slow the car down, there are various devices on the car. So there are 2 parachutes. I talked about the fact we're testing the 2 parachute system while we're down there. There is also air brake doors. So on the side of the car, you'll see there are black doors, carbon fiber doors. We have recently tested those off the car. There was some deflection on those. We think they will probably be good at 500 miles an hour, but we don't want to open them up any faster than that. So at this stage, when we do our high-speed testing phase, we're going to open them up at 500 miles an hour. But when we go for the land speed record, what will happen is basically Andy will ramp up, go through the measured mile, he accelerates as he goes in, he's decelerating when he comes out. So once he cuts the power, the car automatically goes in a steep deceleration phase. At about 800 miles an hour, he can start to deploy those air brake doors. And then when he gets down to 200 miles an hour, he can start using the foot brake. The parachutes on the car are a safety backup, okay? So we would deploy either one or both of those parachutes. Either one or both will slow down the car suitably from 300 miles an hour to bring him safely to a halt before he gets to the end of the desert. So that's the phased braking that you were talking about. And that's still in place, and that's still the way that we're going to be doing it. Anybody else? Yes.
Is there a takeoff speed at the moment?
A takeoff speed? No.
It won't take off.
It could, yeah. I mean, if the aerodynamics are wrong in some form or another, you can take off at about 80 miles an hour. So if you've got the weight correct and the lift correct, it doesn't take much speed to actually get yourself off the ground. So no, we don't want to be taking off. He is an RAF pilot. We want him to remain a driver. We have calculated with the fuel load and the thrust that we've got and the weight of the car, that the car can go 25,000 feet into the air vertically before it runs out of fuel. The kids that calculated that for us were more keen to understand how big the hole would be when it came back down again. But yeah, so no, we don't want to be taking off. Thrust SSC did actually have 2 rockets positioned in the nose of the car, one pointing downwards and one pointing upwards, that would be triggered if the car saw too much lift or too much downward force. Now, part of this high-speed testing is really to understand whether we've got the aerodynamics right, and so far everything is pointing in the right direction, so we should be good. Is that it? Well, thank you very much for listening, and yeah, keep your eyes on the news. Jonathan Amos is coming down on Monday or Tuesday to report for the BBC for 4 days, so there should be some stuff on the BBC. Look out on Twitter, Facebook, we're over it all. You can see all the runs, you can see that video that I was going to show you that I described earlier. So thanks very much. Cheers.